Um, yeah, sorry about last week. I suddenly, last minute, realized I actually had to go to Vancouver last week for a conference. So I had to, fly out, supposed to fly out Sunday, but then due to some mishaps, I had to fly out Monday because I didn't have a passport. Yeah. Anyways, okay. So today's lecture will be specifically about the Swiss governmental system, focusing particularly on their, I think what I would say as the two defining features of the Swiss governance, which is federalism as well as direct democracy. And I'll try to focus mostly on governance right now and try to stay away from politics right now. We will probably get into the political stuff in future lectures, but some political stuff will inevitably come into play here as it does, as the two are kind of intertwined, of course. Yeah, so attendance sheets at the bottom, just same as normal, but with a B at the end this time, because I realized if I just keep using the same pattern, people just don't actually have to show up. And yeah. Okay, so federalism. So what do we mean by federalism? Technically, the name of the country is Helvetic Confederation, but it hasn't really been a confederation since 1848, since the new constitution, where it actually became a federation. I'd say the main fundamental difference between a federation and confederation is the ability to leave. In a confederation is a voluntary system where a can't in the old model, in the old confederacy, they participation in the alliance was voluntary, and any canton could leave at any time they want. But after the whole Sonderbund stuff that we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, that's when they realized in the new constitution they don't want cantons to have the ability to leave without permission from the rest of the country. And this is we see this in the United States as well, with how the difference. The reason the South called themselves the Confederacy is their claim was that anyone should be able to leave at any time they want, while the United States claimed no, it's a federal system where you still have to get permission to leave. So that's kind of the main difference. But beyond that, the main point of federalism is that you have multiple layers of governance. In the United States, we have the national level, states, and cities. Switzerland has a very similar system, basically, where you have the federal level, the cantonal level, and then the municipal or communal. They're both municipal and communal are basically used interchangeably. And so within the cantons, there are 26 cantons in total. 20 full cantons and 6 half cantons. I'll get into why they're called half cantons in a little bit, but for most general purposes, there's 26 cantons total, and they vary in size greatly. For example, Zug, which is the largest one, has over 1.5 million people, and I believe Unterwalden, which is, I believe, this one, has only about 16,000 people. So they vary greatly in size. Yeah, do you have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, so, and then those are basically each canton has its own flag. And one thing is, if you talk to anyone from Switzerland, they actually have, most people from Switzerland have more cantonal pride than they would Swiss pride. They see themselves first and foremost as members of their canton and then the nation. Imagine, Texans here in the United States, but every canton is like that, where everyone kind of values their canton over the overall country. Below the cantons, you have these communities. In 2014, currently we have about 294 municipalities. This is a map of all of them. And one thing that's actually to notice is that just 3 years earlier, there were 2,396, so it's almost a little bit over 100 less. And this is because lately, a lot of municipalities have actually been merging and becoming they realize it's not very efficient to have if you're basically you're a very small town and there's another small town right next to you that are basically splitting up the work with police, fire departments, education systems. You might as well combine these. On the other hand, there have been a lot that have been remaining separate, but just increasing their cooperation by sharing certain facilities. And the interesting thing about all these communities is that only about 20% of them have parliaments where it's representational democracy, where you have like even like in the here in Berkeley we have like a city council, but most communities are actually run directly through communal assembly, which is basically whenever there's a town hall vote meeting or whatever, literally any citizen can come in and vote. Um, yeah, and so like the communities handle a lot of things such as like social services, energy supplies, a lot of the things that you'd imagine that things in communities in the U.S. do. But they also do a lot of more interesting stuff as well. Like uh, the communities are usually in charge of running the local militias, which are very prevalent throughout Switzerland. We'll get into those next week. Um, and so the main principle that Switzerland follows when it comes to federalism, and this is like outlined specifically in their constitution, is the subsidiary principle, which basically means that it's a decentralized division of power and solving issues at the lowest possible level. Basically, what that means is the confederation, the federal government, will only undertake tasks that the cantons are unable to do themselves, or something that requires uniform regulation by the federal government. This includes stuff like the military, for example. And this, so basically, the idea is anything that can be pushed down to lower levels should be pushed down. Um, and if you think about it, this is kind of how a lot of the U.S. Original system was designed as well. Until that, it was realized that that's very inefficient and ineffectual in a lot of ways. And so throughout, like, I don't know, a lot of U.S. history is the story about the federal government amassing more and more power and governance becoming more and more centralized. The four things that are outlined in the Constitution that the federal government does deal with is foreign and security policy, customs on monetary matters, so like, the national bank and stuff dealing with the franc, legislation that applies nationally, and which is, I guess, very broad, and then defense. Yeah.
What level does education and healthcare exist at?
Education and healthcare, primary education is done at primary education, and universities are done at the cantonal level, while grammar school by primary sorry secondary education like high schools and universities are done at the cantonal level, while primary school and kindergarten and like that stuff is all done at the municipal level. Healthcare is mostly done at the cantonal level. Yeah, so we'll talk. So that's a little bit about the Federalist model, and then we'll go into how these things work. Um, like I said, most of the power actually lays in the cantonal government, but I don't have time to go through the structure of every single cantonal government system because there's 26 of them, and that's not even including the municipality ones. So I will go over how the federal government works, though. So you have, similarly to the U.S., you also have three major branches. The two that will focus on the legislative and executive. So the parliament is the legislative branch. It's called and has two houses. Once again, very similar to the U.S. You'll notice that's a common theme throughout Swiss government systems. Because, like I said, like we mentioned last week, when they wrote the federal constitution in 1848, they based it very heavily on the United States Constitution. So yeah, the National Council is also known as the Federal Assembly, and basically it is the lower house with 200 members that are allocated by two cantons by the population of the canton. And so some cantons, the largest ones like Zurich, have 34 seats, while some of the smaller ones like Glarus, Uri, they each only have one seat. And this council is elected every 4 years. And it could be thought of a lot like the House of Representatives, while the Council of States is the upper house, much like the United States Senate, with 2 members per canton. and this is like each canton gets 2 members, with the exception of the half cantons, which only get 1 member. So in total, there are 20, 40, 20, 46 total members of the Council of States. Yeah, and so this, I believe, is also elected every 4 years. And one interesting thing about the MPs here are they're actually pretty much all part-time positions. Unlike in the United States, where like most congressmen are like that's their full-time job. Most MPs in Swiss Parliament will like maybe spend about 3 months a year like focusing on like legislative duties, and then with the rest of their time usually go back to like normal jobs in their home canton, and it's meant to be a very like low profile position in a way. Yeah, and for yeah.
Is it meant to ensure that less legislation is passed?
No, it's just I wouldn't say it's meant to slow down legislation. It's more of that it's well, part of the reason is that a lot of legislation is not proposed by Parliament. It's proposed by the people, which we'll be getting into through a process of referendums that they have. So that's why most of congressmen's jobs are usually about like a lot of it goes into like proposing and writing bills. Well, here it's usually done by the people. Okay. Now then we have the executive branch, which is the federal council, and one thing that's actually seemed very undemocratic about Switzerland is that this federal council is not elected by the people. It's actually chosen directly by Parliament. And this kind of had a couple of reasons. Part of it, most of it was to like avoid the, have it away. They wanted it to be very stable. And so how this federal council works is you basically have these 7 people who together represent the executive branch, the head of state. All 7 of them together are the head of state. Every year they select one person as the president, but that's mostly just as a ceremonial role, to welcome other heads of state or to be the chair at like meetings. This year it is her, Doris Leothard, and basically the president just gets rotated every year. But overall, it's a very consensus-based system because even the council has multiple parties. Right now, it's controlled by 4 parties, usually by this system of like 2-2-2-1, and that's usually the breakup. And this is called a concept they have called the magic formula, which we will get into in a minute. But first, I'm gonna skip this one. So we're gonna watch this video on the Swiss Parliament because I thought it was a good video. Is that sound not working? Oh, wait, right.
It's one of the 3 constitutional powers, along with the Federal Council and the Court.
Alright, you guys need to watch it small.
Everybody's talking about Parliament.
That's right. The word Parliament is, after all, derived from parler, French word for to talk.
So while we're here, how about we talk about Parliament? What exactly is the Swiss Parliament anyway?
Parliament is the highest legislative authority. It's called the Federal Assembly. It's one of the 3 constitutional powers, along with the Federal Council and the courts. It sits in Bern in the Federal Palace, or more specifically, in the Parliament building.
And what exactly does Parliament do? They make new laws, don't they?
Right. They discuss and make decisions on issues that are important to our country, for society, the economy, the military.
Can we watch this happen?
Well, yes, but reaching a final decision is a complicated process.
Wow, how impressive. It's like being in a museum or an opera house.
It is. It was built in 1902, after all.
Lots has changed since then.
Yes, back when our great-great-grandfathers called the shots, women were only present as statues or allegories. But today it's completely normal for women to sit in Parliament too.
National Council, Council of States, two councils in the same building. What about the Federal Council? Do they meet here too?
No, only the National Council and the Council of States meet in the Parliament building. This is where they draft our laws. So you see, the separation of powers applies to location as well.
And the Federal Council, the national government, it implements these laws.
Exactly, and the courts make sure that these laws really are legitimate. The point of this is,
To make sure no one becomes too powerful.
spot on. In a democracy, the state's power always needs to be divided, checked, and balanced.
But why do we need two councils in one parliament?
If the seats were divided up according to the canton's populations, small cantons would be at a disadvantage. In the Council of States, the seats are divided equally among the cantons. This helps to create a balance between the small and the large cantons.
And for a parliamentary decision to pass, it needs to be approved by both the National Council and the Council of States, right?
That's right.
By my count, there are 46 seats in here.
Exactly. Each canton or state appoints either one or two representatives to this council.
And what about the National Council? That one's got 200 members, right?
And they represent the Swiss electorate. The seats are allocated according to the canton's populations,
So that's why Zurich gets 35 seats.
and some smaller cantons get only one.
So, how do these 246 councillors make a new law? Do they just go ahead and start debating and then vote on it afterwards?
No, not quite. The whole process is regulated. The president of their council makes sure everything is done according to the rules. The National Council has a clear seating plan. Members of the same parliamentary group all sit together. The seating plan in the Council of States is less strict.
Sessions. I know what this is. Parliament meets for 3 weeks, 4 times a year. And these periods are called sessions. But what are parliamentary groups?
Parliamentary groups comprise all council members who belong to the same party. If a party is small, it can join forces with another like-minded party to form a larger, more powerful group.
So what do the members do when Parliament isn't in session?
They attend committee meetings or just do their regular jobs. They aren't full-time politicians, so they still know what everyday life is like for ordinary people.
Do they need to be able to speak all 4 national languages?
That would be nice, but it really isn't necessary. Everybody speaks in their mother tongue. The national councillors are lucky. Interpreters translate their debates, and they can listen to them using headphones. By the way, parliamentary meetings are open to the public. You can follow them live or on the web, or read about them afterwards.
Cool. And what are the national councillors working on today?
They're discussing a bill submitted by one of their committees. Most of the work is done in these small groups. This is where compromises are made, confidentially, behind closed doors.
Of course, changing laws or writing new ones takes a great deal of care. But how does this work exactly?
Regardless of whether a bill comes from Parliament itself, the Federal Council, a canton, or a popular initiative from an interest group, the committee responsible, and finally both chambers, must discuss each and every bill, until they come to an agreement. The bill passes back and forth between the two chambers. This usually takes longer than just one session.
And what happens when one chamber accepts a bill, but the other one rejects it?
If the Council of States votes differently from the National Council, the bill is passed back to the National Council, and then back to the Council of States, and back to the National Council, and then...
Wait, stop. This can't possibly keep going ad infinitum.
No, of course not. If the two chambers can't reach an agreement after 3 debates each, the Conciliation Committee has to find a solution. If they can't find one either, the bill is rejected.
And after all that work has been done, Parliament must also have other things to do apart from this.
Yes, it does. In Switzerland, Parliament elects and checks on the members of the Federal Council and the Federal Supreme Court. This isn't the case in other countries.
And who manages the federal finances?
That's another of Parliament's responsibilities. They decide on the annual budget. They also maintain relations with the cantons and with other countries. Parliament meets with foreign delegations and ratifies contracts with other states.
How do the members of Parliament manage to do all of this?
They get support from the parliamentary services, Parliament's administration.
Well, laws obviously don't simply fall into our laps from the dome of the Federal Palace. Say I wanted to get actively involved in this process. What would I have to do?
It's really simple. Join a party and run for Parliament.
I'll try my luck with the National Council first.
Which party though?
I'd probably have the best chances of making a difference as a candidate for a large party, wouldn't I?
Not necessarily. In Switzerland, none of the parties can make decisions single-handedly, so you can join whichever party you feel best represents you. It doesn't need to be a big one.
Sounds good. I'll remember that. You'll be hearing from me.
Good luck. See you soon in Parliament.
Sorry for the cheesiness of some of the videos, but I think it gave like some cool visuals of the like system, and I think it really you can really tell how similar it is to the U.S. system. Does anyone? Right. There's 3 months split over 4 different like sessions. Does anyone know how much how often the U.S. Congress meets? Like, maybe do you by any chance know how often U.S. Congress is in session? Okay, I don't either. But okay, yeah. One thing I thought really cool that was that like the fact that like none of them speak the same like there's like multiple languages, so they have like active translators that are like actively translating the debates as they happen on the floor, which I thought was kind of really cool. So yeah, this video is much shorter. This one will talk about how the allocation of the Federal Council. Yeah, I know those words are kind of annoying, National and Federal Council, but the Federal Council is the executive, National Council is the House in the legislative.
How should a country be ruled? In many democracies, a party that wins a majority forms the government. When a party doesn't reach an absolute majority, it has to join forces with other parties. Together, they form a coalition government. Switzerland's executive, the cabinet, is also made up of politicians from different parties, but it's not a coalition government. Instead, the Swiss have come up with a special system. It's what they call the magic formula. The formula was first applied in 1959. It was a way of dividing the 7 seats of the Swiss cabinet between the 4 largest parties. The idea is to reach decisions by consensus. If the strongest party alone made all the decisions, there would be much more opposition. In Switzerland, where people can force votes on just about every issue, things would be constantly blocked. Instead, cabinet should reflect the interests of a vast number of players and their lobbies, since they have a strong voice in the political decision-making process due to Switzerland's brand of direct democracy. The magic formula is not set down in law. It's an informal agreement among Switzerland's many parties. In recent years, though, the formula has been questioned. In the 2003 parliamentary elections, the party with only 1 cabinet seat was the biggest winner, solidifying its position as the largest in Parliament. As a result, it asked to tweak the magic formula in its favor, and its wish was granted. The equation was further complicated a few years later, with the emergence of a 5th party in the cabinet. Was the magic formula still intact? Did the cabinet makeup reflect the size of parties in Parliament, a necessary condition to ensure consensus politics? Some said yes, since the cabinet was elected fairly by Parliament. But others said no, and crunched the numbers to prove their point. They divided the parties into blocks of left, center, and right, which resulted in a ratio of approximately 2 to 3, a ratio that has been more or less unchanged since the magic formula was introduced more than half a century ago. However, from 2003, the ratio in cabinet was 2-1-4. The debate over the magic formula is likely to continue. The only certainty is the desire to maintain the principle of consensus politics.
So yeah, basically a bit of the detail of what happened there was the 2-2-1 formula worked, except then there's one party called the SPV party, the Swiss People's Party, which is sort of the most right. It's like a very right-wing nationalist party, and it used to be the small one with only one seat, but for the past 20 years or so, it's been gaining a lot of popularity to the point that now it's actually the largest party in the Swiss government. And so even after they were given the concession of letting them increase from 1 seat to 2, in 2003's parliamentary election, they kind of like went ahead and forced themselves to 3 seats, and that kind of annoyed everyone else. And so in 2007, the other parties struck back and basically kicked them completely out of the federal council. So now they had 0 seats, and this is like the first time since like the 1930s that Switzerland had an opposition party, which means like a major party not in government. And so the SPV was like, oh, we're going to use this opportunity to like be like the opposition party and it should be fun. But it turned out it actually kind of really sucked because they couldn't actually get anything done. Because basically being the opposition party isn't very helpful in Switzerland because everything is done through compromise anyways. And now all you did was make yourself not part of the compromise group. So in 2008, when one of the federal council members resigned, SPV took back one of their seats. So now they're back in the parliament, and since then there have been new parties, a 5th party called the Green Party, which kind of came out. It became big enough that people thought it deserved its own seat now in the council. So now you have 5 major parties in. Well, actually, we're back to 4 now. Yes, since the 2015 election. So yeah, so the other thing that we have is Switzerland, in the constitution, it claims to be a democracy in which people are sovereign. And this is done through obvious things like people voting for their parliamentary members. Basically every Swiss citizen over the age of 18 now has the right to vote. In some cantons, it goes down to 16. This is actually a very recent phenomenon because women didn't get the right to vote in national elections until 1971, and in some cantons, not even until 1991 in cantonal elections. So recently, it's finally been getting to like universal suffrage, and while voting on national elections is great, but we do that kind of stuff here in the U.S. as well. One thing that makes Switzerland very different is they have a very strong referendum process, which like we do often in the U.S. Some states have referendums, like in California, but in Switzerland, it's basically part of the fabric of their political system. You have 3 main and people will like have referendums on like the most like on basically everything. Like some recent ones in the last 10 years include considering abolishing the army, abandoning nuclear energy, reform of health and unemployment insurance. Just last year there was a national referendum about the implementation of a universal basic income, and that one was very contentious. It ended up not going through. But yeah, so there's 3 kinds of steps to a referendum, essentially. You have the popular initiative, which basically gives the right to any Swiss citizen to propose an amendment or addition to the Constitution. One thing about the Swiss Constitution is it's very much more like detailed than something like the American Constitution. It actually has a lot of laws actually get added as amendments to the Constitution. So, and so basically what you need is 100,000 signatures of people who are eligible to vote, collected over 18 months. And then once you have enough valid signatures, the initiative is put to a popular referendum, or to a popular vote. So in the next voting cycle, that will be on there. And so that's kind of one of the reasons is a lot of laws in Switzerland are actually proposed through the referendum, through the popular initiative process, rather than through parliamentary proposals. Then you also have the optional referendum, which basically this is when a parliament chooses to create a law that's not a constitutional amendment, but just normal law. Citizens have the right to basically say that any parliamentary decision can be put to a national vote, and they can do this with 50,000 signatures that have to be collected within 100 days of the passing of that law. And so basically what this does is it gives the citizens the ability to basically contest anything that Parliament passes. It's kind of like the citizens' veto in a way. And then you have the mandatory referendum, in which any constitutional amendments that are proposed by Parliament have to automatically be put to popular vote. You don't even need to collect any signatures for that. So yeah, this video will go a little bit talking about referendums.
Stop taking advantage of the working class. That was the concern behind one of the first popular initiatives. It was stopped at the ballot box, with almost 80% of voters choosing no. At the polls, other popular initiatives have fared no better. The reason is that they may have posed questions deemed too radical by Swiss voters at the time. So between 1891 and the turn of the millennium, in the first 109 years of popular initiatives, only 12 were approved by voters. But in the past 16 years, the initiatives have had more luck, with 10 of them being successful. Why this sudden increase in the success rate of popular initiatives?
This can be explained with the European Union on one side, but also with increased globalization and the rise of issues like immigration, as well as associated issues like security.
These are issues for which advertising and campaigns raised much more attention than before. Parties also started getting financially powerful patrons.
Ultimately, success at the ballot box cannot be bought out. On the other hand, you can buy the launch of a popular initiative, as financing can help a lot in getting the required 100,000 signatures.
In the early days of popular initiatives, 100,000 signatures meant almost 8% of the population. But today, that would be just under 2% of Switzerland's total population. So does the launch of a popular initiative need higher hurdles? This is one of the questions that the center-right has brought to the table, but probably with little chance of succeeding.
With the present system, everything has been going pretty well, so there is no great pressure to reform it and increase the number of signatures. Increasing the number of signatures would require the majority of the people and cantons to agree so that the constitution can be changed. Because the two major parties in Parliament, the People's Party and the Social Democrats, have no interest in adjusting the present system, I don't see anything changing. When I see the fascination that our system of popular initiatives inspires, particularly in other European countries, and how much it is loved here in Switzerland, I'm sure it's an instrument of democracy that will be with us in the coming decades.
So yeah, so how the voting works is that you have options of going. Most cantons you can either go to the ballot box, but most people actually voting happens on average 4 times every year, and so that's pretty inconvenient to have to go to the voting booths every 4 times a year, and so most in the U.S. we have the option to do mail-in voting, but most people end up going to the ballot box. In Switzerland, most votes are actually end up being done through the postal system. And there's a trend towards e-voting. Geneva specifically, because of its large size, is really trying to push for implementing e-voting systems. This is actually a topic I'm particularly very interested in because it relates a lot to my work in blockchain. But one of the coolest ways of voting that is which the author of the book really likes to like bring up a lot is this one where you have historic open air democracy. Whoops. All right then. Well, luckily I have another video of the same thing. Basically, in two of the cantons now, they still like keep vestiges of this like open air democracy that people like everyone, and obviously it's in the smaller cantons where everyone in the canton shows up on election day and you vote by like raising your hand. This is one.
Verhüllt haben sich an diesem
Sorry.
Sonntag neben Bundesrat Guy Parmelin
Yeah.
einige zum Schutz
So basically, like I'll just put this in the background, but this is like in the previous video that's not there. It's really cool because they like really like maintain a lot of the old traditions of it. Like to show up to vote, you can either bring like your ID card or you can bring your like family ancestral sword, which is like really cool. I don't know. And luckily, and so like the national referendums have been generally pretty, or the cantonal referendums have been pretty good at like, you know, sticking to the philosophy of the Constitution. So this is actually a famous one that happened earlier this year. It was I forgot which canton it was, but they were proposing a ban on burqas, and so the cantonal parliament actually ended up passing that. And so the people basically rejected that, and they had a referendum opposing that law, and it actually went ahead and the referendum passed. So that law was actually removed once again. And I think this is a good time to bring up this story of Jura, which I think I may have alluded to a few times. So basically, up till 1971, this is like one of the main cantons of Bern. It's one of the larger ones. And you had this area in the north that's called Jura, which is, this area is actually mostly French speaking, while the rest of Bern is German speaking. And so for a long time, you actually had like a huge separatist movement in Jura where they wanted, and by separatist, I don't mean they want to like leave Switzerland. They just wanted to leave Bern. And it actually got a little bit violent during like the 1960s a few times. And so in 1971, through a series of a lot of local referendums with all the relevant parties, as well as a national referendum, which passed by 82.3%. You needed the national referendum because you're basically you're adding a new canton, which like changes the breakup of like Council of States and everything. So the national referendum went through with 82.3% support, and basically Jura got to become its own canton. Jura is like a region within Bern, and it consists of 7 districts, sort of. And 3 of them basically ended up choosing to leave. And then the 4 that stayed, they were in this sort of weird position where the people, this is called Bernese Jura, and people there actually speak French like the rest of the people of Jura, but the majority are actually Protestant, like most of the people in Bern, while Jura is mostly Catholic. And so the Bernese Jura had this sort of choice of do they want to go and be the linguistic minority in Bern or be the religious minority in Jura, and they chose to be the linguistic minority. So that's why that area of Jura, Bern, it's kind of very contentious because so a lot of people in Jura still want the rest of Bernese Jura to come and join them. And so just earlier this year, one of the largest cities, well, not one of the largest cities, but one of the major cities in that region of Bernese Jura actually had a local referendum to move to switch to Jura instead of Bern. And so basically now they have to go ahead and they went ahead and redrew the borders a little bit. And so now that city is now part of Jura. And literally 2 days ago, so after that larger city kind of went, people thought that a lot of the smaller towns around it would also switch. And so literally just 2 days ago, there was the vote on that. And actually pretty much all of them actually decided to stay in Bern. So it's kind of interesting. And then there's a lot of other proposals that have been proposed. It's still a huge like point of contention. Like jury Jurassic. That's what it's called. It's like a really cool word when I get to read it. Jurassic separatism. But yeah, Jurassic separatism is like still very like prominent, and still a lot of emotion and stuff behind it. There have been other proposals, such as splitting it into two half cantons, where basically Jura gets to be will be a half canton, and then there's Bernese Jura will get to be a half canton. But obviously, then now the juries don't want that because now they just got their status removed from a full canton to a half canton. So, yeah. So let's go into a little bit of issues with direct democracy. One of the issues is most of the referendums actually have pretty low voter turnout, with about 40 to 50% of voters actually showing up, which is pretty low if you think about it. And a lot of the proposed causes are due to like just voter fatigue, where if you're having 4 national referendums a year, it's very taxing, and people just stop caring after a little bit. And so yeah, this is like actually a major issue that a lot of people are trying to solve, and it really like lends the question like, is direct democracy really that great of a system if you only have such few people actually showing up to vote? A lot of corporate leaders worry that this extravaganza of direct democracy is starting to threaten the country's image as a stable, predictable, open place to do business. And this has to do with a lot of, for example, a lot of the recent referendums have been like restricting immigration. And so a lot of the major companies in Switzerland are saying this is really bad because it's like hurting their ability to employ new employees and like bring in immigrants. Yeah, so usually that's kind of becoming a big problem, as well as in 2008, there was a national referendum that actually proposed a constitutional amendment that banned minarets, which are the like those towers you often see outside of mosques. And so that was actually a point of huge like national contention, and it's like people are even right now are still trying to like get that amendment revoked again through another referendum. So that's what I meant by like forcing radical ideas, bypassing parliament, and it's a very slow-moving process. Things take a very long time because, for example, in the Jura situation, they had to do a long series of local referendums, basically with every party involved. Like you have to do a referendum in Bern, then you have to do one in like Jura, then you have to do one in all the local towns, and so it gets very messy and very slow-moving process. And then also with federalism, so when Napoleon like first invaded, they actually had a thought of like making these larger cantons, and like combining them. Ended up not going through, but basically there have been a lot of proposals that these 26 cantons are just too many, and a lot of them are pretty small. Like some of them are smaller than the population of the city of Berkeley, and so this guy who's actually the former director of the Federal Department of Spatial Planning, he actually published a book in 2010 called The Switzerland of Tomorrow, and he suggested changing the 26 canton system into these 9 cantons that he proposes. And so this is actually, like even the Federal Statistic Office currently uses these 7 regions, because basically like some of the cantons are too small to like provide any meaningful data for doing statistics. And so there's been a little bit of a push lately to see like, is it worth like combining some of these cantons together? But in all likelihood, this will probably not fly with most people, because this would have to go once again through referendum, and most like I said, most people in Switzerland are extremely they see themselves as citizens of their canton first, and the idea of merging these cantons is probably not going to fly very well with most people. This is a video that I'm not going to play because not enough time, but this is basically this is a TED Talk about how the Swiss confederal model can shape the design for the European Union. And so basically the homework questions for this week are, what are your thoughts on that video? Another option is what went different in the American versus Swiss Federalist model. They basically started off very similar, but in the U.S. you saw a lot of concentration over time. Why did we not see that similar kind of concentration in Switzerland? And then finally, how can some of these issues with direct democracy be overcome, especially the low voter turnout? And are these even issues at all, really? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Why are there half
Basically, just when they were started, there were basically you had these traditional cantons that were there before Napoleon came, and then after Napoleon came, when they were making in 1848 when they were making the country, they said that some of these traditional cantons actually wanted to split into two, but they said, the cantons that were like traditionally one canton, they're like, wait, you guys can't split into two and call yourselves two different cantons, so you guys each have to be like a half canton and get only one seat. It was kind of a way of like, I don't know, it's just because of historical purposes in a way. The weird thing is like, why did Jura not get to do that with Bern? If like Jura is breaking away from Bern, should that be like half canton and Bern be a half canton? That probably wouldn't have flied well with either side though. Also, considering that Bern is the capital, that's kind of weird if the capital only has one vote. Although in the U.S., the capital has 0 votes, so go figure. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Cool. All right. Cool.
Are you gonna put the questions on Facebook?
Yeah, I'll send out the email hopefully earlier this time. I'll put it on Facebook, and I'll put the slides as well. And I'll link to this video because you probably need that video if you're going to do that first question. I really, even if you're not doing that question, really watch this video. I think it's really cool.